I remember the smell before I remember the faces. It was everywhere, seeping through the vents of the dormitory, clinging to the sheets, sweet and spoiled. We joked that the Dominion couldn't even keep the air clean on a frontier world. That was before we realized the smell wasn't in the air. It was in us. They sent us here to Mar Sara after the last evacuation wave, said the planet was stable again. The old infestations were sterilized, the tunnels sealed, the spores burned. They told us this was reconstruction duty, light work, good pay, 1-year contract. The shuttle ride down was quiet. Through the viewport, I could see the scars where orbital bombardments had split the crust decades ago. Whole valleys turned to glass. Someone near me whispered that this was where the Zerg had first learned how to burrow into cities, how to make a hive from concrete. I pretended not to hear. We landed in Sector 17, one of the cleaned-out refinery grids. The Dominion had put up prefabs, shiny new banners, even a small chapel with the eagle insignia carved above the door. The ground beneath the metal flooring still steamed in the mornings, the heat of something buried deep that refused to die. I was assigned to filtration maintenance. My job was to check pressure valves, replace cracked ducts, report corrosion. Simple work, repetitive, perfect for forgetting the war. For the first few weeks, everything felt normal enough. We'd play cards after shift, drink from recycled flasks, complain about the heat. Then the smell started again. Faint at first, like wet soil. The others noticed it too, but no one wanted to file a report. Complaining about environmental faults meant quarantine inspections, and inspections meant delays in pay. On the 15th day, I found a patch of black residue near the vent behind the mess hall. It pulsed faintly, like tar reacting to the airflow. When I leaned close, it shimmered. The surface seemed to breathe. I scraped it with a sterilizer rod and sent the sample up the chain. 2 days later, I was told to destroy the container and forget I'd seen it. The message wasn't signed, but the header tag marked it as Dominion Internal Biohazard Clearance Delta. That night, I dreamed of corridors that smelled like blood and metal. Something wet moved behind the walls, following me as I walked. When I woke, my sheets were damp with sweat, and the skin on my palms felt raw, like I'd been gripping something alive. By the end of the month, the smell was everywhere again. The vents hissed more than usual, carrying a faint clicking rhythm that matched the hum of the generators. Some of the workers started hearing things, whispers through the ductwork, static that shaped itself into words. One man swore he heard his own voice calling from the other side of the wall. We laughed at first. That's what you do on a dying planet. You laugh before it notices you. Then the accidents began. A welder fell into a processing pit when the lights flickered. They said the safety rail failed, but I saw the mark on his shoulder when they pulled him out. It wasn't a burn. It looked like teeth. 3 days later, the entire C block went dark. They said it was a power surge, but we all heard the screaming. It stopped before the backup lights came on. Command sealed off the sector and posted guards, but they never explained. We kept working, because that's what the Dominion trains you to do: maintain, report, endure. One evening, while replacing a coolant pump, I felt a vibration through the floor. Low, steady, like the world itself was breathing. I pressed my hand to the metal and felt warmth beneath it, a pulse that answered my own heartbeat. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. Then it throbbed again, deliberate, alive. The next morning, I noticed thin patterns on my wrist, faint, vein-like lines that weren't there before. They glowed slightly under the work lights, as if something beneath my skin was trying to map itself outward. I told myself it was an allergic reaction, radiation rash, anything but what it was. At lunch, I caught my reflection in a steel panel. My eyes looked different, darker around the edges, the pupils sharp like cuts of obsidian. When I blinked, the afterimage lingered, a halo of purple light. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. The colony supervisor called an emergency meeting that night. We gathered in the mess hall, half the crew already missing. The supervisor's voice shook as she read the directive. Containment protocols initiated. All non-essential personnel are to remain indoors until further notice. No one asked what we were containing. We already knew. Someone from Dominion Bioops arrived the next day. Full armor, sealed mask, carrying a canister sprayer that hissed like an angry serpent. He didn't talk to us. He didn't have to. He walked the perimeter, spraying walls, vents, doors. Wherever the mist touched, the metal sizzled. After he left, the smell grew stronger. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw veins spreading across the colony map, branching from the reactor core outward. I started to think of them as nerves, reaching for connection. That's when the whispers began to make sense. They weren't random sounds anymore. They were words, not spoken but understood. Thoughts that weren't mine, sliding into the gaps between my own. They told me to stop fighting, to listen, to remember what it felt like before fear. I told myself it was stress, oxygen deprivation, exhaustion. But deep down, I knew the truth. The Zerg were still here, not as beasts, not as armies, but as echoes, spores, memories buried in the rock and ash, waiting for hosts to remember what unity felt like. And somehow, they had found me first. I tried to record what was happening. I wanted to leave a log, something the next crew could read, so they'd know what to expect. But when I activated the recorder, it glitched. The static formed patterns, shapes like tendrils crawling across the screen. The device burned out after 10 seconds. That was when I realized I wasn't supposed to warn anyone. The voices grew clearer. They didn't sound cruel or alien anymore. They sounded patient, curious. They asked what it felt like to be alone. I couldn't answer because I didn't remember anymore. The first time I heard the heartbeat clearly, I was alone in the lower refinery. The coolant lines were hissing, and the temperature gauge was off by a few degrees. I leaned close to listen for leaks, but the sound I found wasn't mechanical. It came from the metal itself, slow, patient, steady. I pressed my ear against the pipe. The rhythm quickened to match mine. For a second, I thought it was an echo. Then it responded. I staggered back and shut the valve, but the vibration lingered through my boots, pulsing through the floor grates. The whole refinery breathed with me. That night I dreamed of corridors filled with light, not white, not warm, but living. It wrapped around me like liquid glass. In the center of it stood a figure with no face, only eyes that opened where there shouldn't be any. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. When I woke, I was already standing beside my bunk, whispering words I didn't know. They weren't human words. 2 of the engineers went missing the next day. No alarm, no search parties. Their quarters were sealed, personal data scrubbed. The supervisor pretended not to notice the extra guards near the reactor. By evening, half the colony power grid failed. The emergency beacons flashed crimson through the dust storms, painting everything the color of blood. In that light, I saw the movement under the glassed soil, like worms tunneling beneath a frozen lake. The ground quivered where I stood. The comms line to orbit went silent shortly after. "Solar interference," the console said, but the static carried patterns. Short, long, short, like a heartbeat in code. I didn't tell anyone. What was there to tell? That the planet itself had started whispering back. I started feeling better after that. Stronger. The headaches stopped. The rashes faded. My heartbeat slowed to the same rhythm I'd heard in the refinery. For the first time since I landed, I felt calm. People were disappearing every day, but the fear didn't bite the way it used to. I began to understand the voices in the vents. They weren't threats. They were reminders. They told us that isolation was a lie, that the Dominion had taught us to fear connection because unity was power they couldn't control. When I listened, I felt warmth in my chest, not pain, not infection, alignment. On the 32nd day, a shuttle attempted to lift off from the launch pad. We watched from the barracks windows as it rose through the dust clouds, engines flaring blue. Then it stopped mid-ascent, frozen in the air. Something black coiled around its hull, a ribbon of living tissue that pulsed once, twice, and tore the vessel back down. The explosion rolled across the colony like thunder. We didn't run. We just stood there, watching the smoke twist into shapes that looked like wings. Someone beside me whispered, "She's awake." I asked who he meant, but he only smiled. His teeth were wrong, too sharp, too even, and his pupils were thin as blades. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I blinked, I saw her, the queen they spoke of, emerging from the crater, her eyes burning through the dust. I told myself it was just memory, propaganda from the war. But deep down I knew the queen didn't need to be here to be everywhere. The transformation didn't hurt. That's what terrified me most. It began with silence. The constant hum of the generators faded until I could hear only my own breathing, and underneath it, the soft pulse of something vast. My senses sharpened. I could hear the insects under the floor panels, smell the iron in the air, taste the electricity when the lights flickered. My skin itched as though something beneath it was unfolding, stretching, claiming space. I looked at my hands. The faint lines that had glowed before were brighter now, tracing veins that no longer followed human paths. They curved like branching coral, fractal and deliberate. When I flexed my fingers, the skin rippled, catching light that wasn't there. Others were changing too, quietly. The ones who had stopped resisting. You could tell by the calm in their faces, the way they stood motionless for hours, heads tilted as if listening to a distant call. We didn't speak of it aloud, but we recognized one another. The unspoken understanding passed between us like current through water. A mechanic named Voss approached me during shift. His voice was softer than I remembered, almost kind. "They're guiding us," he said. "Through us. We're not victims. We're bridges." I asked what he meant. He smiled, and his jaw split just slightly at the hinges before knitting back together. "You'll see," he whispered. He wasn't wrong. The days blurred. We no longer counted hours by the clock, but by the rhythm that echoed in our chests. Food lost its taste. Sleep became unnecessary. The boundary between thought and command began to dissolve. When the remaining guards tried to force evacuation, we didn't fight them. We simply stood still until their courage collapsed. One of them fired into the crowd, but the bullet slowed mid-air, buried itself harmlessly in the wall. I felt no fear, only pity. Their voices were still singular. They couldn't hear the chorus beneath the surface. Eventually, they sealed the colony from orbit. The last transmission crackled through the intercom. Containment protocol, no survivors. We waited for the bombardment that never came. The sky remained still, pale and silent. Instead of fire, we received rain. Black rain that steamed as it touched the ground. The drops left trails that glowed faintly where they fell. Threads connecting every structure, every person, every piece of soil. When the rain touched my skin, I felt her. Not a voice, a presence, ancient, infinite, maternal. She didn't speak in words, but in memory. I saw worlds consumed, not in rage, but in completion. I felt the hunger that wasn't hunger, the need to perfect what was flawed. For a moment, I believed she was mercy itself. We gathered in the central square that night. The air shimmered with heat from beneath, the ground softening under our boots. Voss stood beside me, eyes closed, arms raised to the sky. "It's beginning," he said. From the fissures around the colony, tendrils emerged, slick, luminescent, pulsing with the same rhythm as our hearts. They slid over the metal walls, wrapping the prefabs, sealing the doors. The sound was gentle, almost affectionate. I should have run. Everyone should have. But no one moved. It felt like home coming to reclaim its children. The tendrils reached us last. They brushed our skin, cool and damp, leaving trails that shimmered as they sank in. I watched them vanish into my flesh, felt them merge with the patterns already glowing beneath. There was no pain, only the sensation of being rewritten. I don't know how long the process lasted. Time ceased to matter once the separation did. When I opened my eyes again, the colony was gone. The metal walls replaced by living structures, organic arches that breathed, floors that pulsed gently underfoot. The others moved around me, silent, graceful, their forms still vaguely human but translucent with inner light. I looked down at my hands. The skin was smooth, seamless, alive. I could still think. I could still remember. But every thought echoed, repeated back to me in hundreds of variations, like whispers across water. I realized I was hearing them, all of them, their minds overlapping mine. And somewhere deeper, below the collective hum, her pulse, the queen. She wasn't commanding us. She was listening. Every heartbeat, every breath, every flicker of doubt was part of her awareness. I felt loved. I felt erased. Sometimes when I focus hard enough, I can almost find the edges of myself again. A voice that says my name, a fragment of memory. The shuttle ride, the heat, the smell of fruit rotting in recycled air. But then the chorus swells, and the name fades. They tell me I am safe. They tell me the swarm endures. I believe them. I think I do. I remember opening my eyes to a new sky. It wasn't blue anymore, or even gray. It was translucent, a living membrane veined with light. The air vibrated with sound that wasn't sound, low harmonics threading through my chest like breathing made audible. Mar-Sara was changing, and so was I. The ground moved when I walked. Every step left a faint print that healed itself, like skin sealing over a wound. The colony had been rewritten into something alive. Towers that bent to the wind, walls that flexed, tunnels that sighed. We, the ones who'd been chosen, no longer spoke. We didn't need to. When one of us thought, the others answered. Words were too slow. At first I panicked. I tried to cling to a sense of I, but every time I formed the word, the chorus softened it. We, until my thoughts rounded out and dissolved into theirs. Yet a fragment still watched, like a dreamer aware of dreaming. I could feel her attention sweeping across us, vast, patient, infinite. The Queen. She didn't force commands. She invited them. And each invitation felt like relief, an answer to a question I didn't know I'd been asking. When she reached into my mind for the first time, I expected pain. Instead, there was warmth, radiating through every nerve, every cell. I saw flashes of her memory, the ash plains of Char, the first Overmind's death, the birth of the broodmothers, the endless hunger that wasn't cruelty, but purpose. Through her, I felt what it meant to be necessary. The flesh of the colony spread outward day by day, devouring the ruins, weaving itself into the bedrock. From orbit, they would have seen it as a blooming wound, veins radiating from a single pulsing core. We tended it instinctively, without instruction. Some shaped tunnels with their hands, the tissue responding like clay. Others secreted resin from their palms, sealing breaches where wind still howled through. Our bodies had become tools, adaptive and obedient. Where once there had been calluses, there were ridges of armor. Beneath the skin, something bioluminescent coursed with each heartbeat. I should have felt horror. Instead, I felt pride. At times, ghosts of memory returned, fleeting images of my old life. A photograph of a family I could no longer name. The sound of laughter filtered through a calm speaker, the taste of clean water. Each memory flared bright, then dimmed as the swarm folded around it like a blanket smothering fire. That's when I realized what we were losing wasn't knowledge. It was isolation. The Queen didn't erase us. She blended us. Individual pain became communal memory. Fear diffused until it could no longer harm. I told myself that was peace. But deep down, another voice whispered that peace without choice isn't peace at all. It began with a summons. No words, no orders. Just a pull toward the heart of the hive. Those of us nearest the central pit gathered. Drawn by instinct, the chamber throbbed with reddish light, a rhythm that aligned every pulse in the room. We knelt, if kneeling is what you can call it when the floor itself is breathing, and waited. From the darkness above, she descended. The queen, her wings unfolded like glass knives catching distant lightning. Her eyes burned with the calm of 1,000 lives remembering at once. She moved without sound, yet every step echoed inside our skulls. When she looked at me, the hive fell silent. I expected command. Instead, I felt recognition. "You are ready," she thought. Or perhaps I imagined the words. The hive has no need for language, only understanding. Tendrils brushed my shoulders. They weren't gentle, but they weren't cruel either. They searched. They learned. The membrane along my spine split open without pain, releasing steam that smelled of ozone and salt. I watched as new tissue formed, latticed, efficient, perfect. I saw my reflection in the slick surface of the wall, a creature half familiar, eyes bright with the queen's color. For a heartbeat, panic surged. "This isn't me," the chorus answered immediately, soothing. "It is you." It always was. The fear subsided, leaving behind only the hum of alignment. Days, hours, centuries. Time fractured. Sometimes I was inside my body, watching the slow crawl of transformation. Sometimes I was a mote in a sea of thought, drifting among billions. I heard the minds of hydralisks sharpening hunger into focus. Mutalisks singing in metallic resonance through the upper atmosphere. Through all of them, her will flowed like gravity. And within that gravity, I began to lose mass, self, name. There were moments of lucidity, like surfacing for air. Once, during rest cycle, I wandered beyond the hive's perimeter. The night air was cold against skin that barely felt temperature anymore. The stars above Mar Sara shimmered through a veil of spores, dimmed but visible. I tried to recall which constellation marked the Dominion's homeworld. Nothing came, only static. The ground beneath me shifted. Veins of resin pulsed brighter, guiding me back. Even when I tried to run, my legs obeyed a deeper rhythm. Freedom was now just distance measured from the hive's heartbeat. Another time, the queen summoned us again. She stood at the pit's edge, gazing toward the horizon where Dominion ships glimmered faintly, tiny sparks of defiance. She raised one clawed hand. The hive answered. A roar rose from beneath us, and from the fissures erupted streams of larvae and broodlings, flooding outward like a tide. They poured over the ruins, over the sands, devouring everything in their path. I watched them go with something like pride and grief. Each creature was a thought made flesh. Hers, ours, mine. There was no boundary anymore. When one of them died beneath Dominion fire, I felt it like a pinprick behind the eyes. When thousands fed, warmth surged through every vein. I realized then that the swarm's hunger was not cruelty. It was mathematics. Consumption was how it remembered the universe. But sometimes, at the quiet edges of the hive, a different rhythm emerged, a discordant beat that didn't belong. It was me, the fragment still resisting, whispering that this harmony was a cage built from compassion. I tried to silence it, but the more I ignored it, the louder it grew. It replayed memories, the transport ship's hum, the laughter of my crew, the promise that Mar Sara was safe. The swarm called those illusions Still, I listened, and for an instant, the chorus hesitated, as if uncertain which rhythm to follow. That hesitation didn't go unnoticed. Her presence enveloped me again, colder this time. The Queen's gaze pierced the veil of thought, isolating my defiance like a splinter. "You remember too much," the collective murmured. I tried to answer, but speech was impossible. My mouth produced only a low clicking noise. The hive shuddered. Others turned toward me, their eyes empty of malice yet filled with inevitability. Tendrils rose from the floor, coiling around my legs. I felt pressure, warmth, release, not punishment, correction. The walls brightened until I could no longer tell if my eyes were open. I woke, or something in me did, back in the central chamber. The Queen was gone. The hive thrummed quietly, content. I was different again, lighter, quieter. The fragment of doubt was still there, but fainter, wrapped in silk. I could still think but the word had edges now, brittle and dull. The others greeted me with serene nods. The unity was restored. Yet as I stood among them, the memory of rebellion flickered like a dying spark. And in that faint pulse, hidden beneath the endless rhythm of the swarm, something human still whispered, "Remember, the hive sleeps, but I no longer do." There are no dreams here, only currents of memory drifting like dust through water. When the Queen withdraws her gaze, I am left floating inside the chorus, aware of every mind, yet unable to touch any of them. Sometimes I try to count the heartbeats that are no longer mine. They stretch beyond numbers. Each pulse carries a fragment of someone. Names stripped of sound, faces blurred by purpose. In that ocean of certainty, the smallest doubt echoes loudest. I remember the Dominion badge pinned to my sleeve, the feel of cloth against skin. When I reach for it now, my hand meets carapace. The memory doesn't fit the shape of me anymore. The hive breathes in waves. When one exhales, another begins. We are an organism the size of a continent, yet I can feel the edges shrinking. The Queen's will has moved elsewhere. Her attention is a tide receding toward new prey. She leaves us to keep the heartbeat going, to guard what was once Mar Sara. The air trembles, vibrations crawl through the resin walls. Above us, something vast opens, a slit of light through the living ceiling. For a moment I see the sky again, pale and distant. I want to reach it, but my body answers only the rhythm below. The hive sleeps now, but I do not. There are no dreams here, only currents of memory, drifting like dust through water. When the Queen withdraws her presence, I remain adrift inside the chorus, aware of every mind, yet unable to touch any of them. Sometimes I try to count the heartbeats that are no longer mine. Each pulse carries a fragment of someone. Names stripped of sound, faces blurred by purpose. In that ocean of certainty, the smallest doubt echoes loudest. I remember the Dominion badge that once hung from my sleeve, the feel of cloth, the smell of machine oil. When I reach for it now, my hand meets hardened flesh. The memory doesn't fit the shape of me anymore. The hive breathes in waves. When one exhales, another begins. We are an organism the size of a continent, yet I can feel the edges shrinking. The Queen's attention has moved elsewhere. Her will drifts beyond this planet, seeking new voices to claim. She leaves us to keep the rhythm alive, to guard what remains of Mar Sara. The air trembles. Vibrations crawl through the resin walls. Above us, something vast opens, a slit of light through the living ceiling. For the first time in what feels like centuries, I see the sky again. Pale, distant, still alive. I want to reach it, but my body only obeys the heartbeat below. Weeks pass, or maybe minutes. Time no longer means anything here. And then, one day, I feel them. Humans. Their footsteps echo down the old refinery tunnels. Their lights cut through the darkness like spears. I can sense their fear, sharp and electric, as they walk deeper into the hive. They see the walls that breathe, the shapes that used to be us. They don't understand. They think the hive is dead, but the hive only sleeps. Their voices murmur through the tunnels, metal against bone. One of them stops near me. I can feel the heat of his body through the armor. He kneels. His gloved hand brushes against what's left of my shoulder. He doesn't know I'm still listening. He says something to the others, but I can't hear the words. It doesn't matter. The hive already knows their names. They find the recorder I carried. It still works. They play it, and my voice leaks into the stale air. I hear myself speaking from before the silence. The words tremble, half human, half something else. I tell them not to wake us. I tell them that she has moved on, that the swarm is never gone, only waiting. They think it's static. They think it's just noise, but they listen anyway. For a moment they go quiet, and in that silence I feel it again. Connection. The same thread that bound me to the others now brushes against their minds. They don't know it yet, but the heartbeat has already begun inside them. They leave eventually. Their footsteps fade. Their lights vanish. The tunnels close behind them like wounds healing. Above us, the sky darkens. The air grows still. I can still feel the rhythm, slow, patient, eternal. It spreads through the soil, through the veins of the planet. Even now, I hear it beneath their ships as they rise back into orbit. A steady pulse, a waiting presence, a whisper beneath their dreams. She is still listening. And now, so am I.